Buenos días, everybody. Welcome to Latino Leaders Rising, El Poder de la Mujer. And today we have the honor and the pleasure of interviewing one of my oldest and dearest friends, who's also a dynamite leader in the Hispanic national community, Sylvia Puente. Welcome, Sylvia.
Hey, Juan, as always, good to see you.
So Sylvia is a public policy expert, and we are going to talk a lot about that. And hopefully by the end of the session, we'll all be on board with how important it is to work on public policy. But she is a national leader who's president and CEO of the Latino Policy Forum for 15 years. So you know leadership is a lifelong commitment. It's a nonprofit in Illinois that works for equity, justice, and economic prosperity, particularly for Latinos in that area. And she's a frequent expert on Latino issues and has published a number of reports and everything. So we want to hear all about that. Now, she got an award from Mexico. And how do you say that award?
Otley Award.
Otley Award. Does it have a meaning, Otley?
It does. I think it means pathbreaker.
Pathbreaker. So she won that award, and Mexico gives that to recognition of people who are serving the Mexican community in the U.S. So it's kind of a big thing because Sylvia has Mexican roots, and to be honored by your ancestors, in a sense, is a really wonderful thing to do. She's also got an honorary PhD from the Governor State University and from Roosevelt University. And she's been recognized by Hispanic Business Magazine as one of 100 most influential Latinos in the United States. Wow, Sylvia, congratulations. I know that's taken a lot of hard work to get to where you are today. And we're so grateful for all the energy and love and commitment and intelligence that you put into your work. But I want to know how you got here. What is your origin story? What made you become this public policy expert, this advocacy for Latinos?
Wow, that's a big question, Juana.
It is.
It's hard to really try to synthesize. So first of all, let me just say, lovely to see you and congratulations on this series that you're putting together and interviewing these outstanding women so that we can share our histories. And I've been thinking a lot about how do we share our knowledge and our information because I'm about to turn 66.
66 and getting your kick.
And realizing that these days I'm often the oldest person in the room, and have made a conscious decision over the past year that I'm very much a doer, and I very much look forward and looking forward to things, and that I have to be a little bit more contemplative, and I have to share a little bit more of my story and stories. So I've been very intentional about trying to do that a little bit more this past year with the rooms that I'm in, with my staff, and with others. So when I think about my origin stories, there's a few different pieces to it. But, you know, I'm from Chicago. I was born in Chicago. Both of my parents were born in Texas, and they both came from farm worker families. And they settled in Chicago when they were both in high school. And maybe because of that, then in the early 70s, when the United Farmworker movement was in full bloom, my parents were very, very involved. And my mother took me to my first picket line when I was 13.
Well, you know what, Sylvia, fill in for the folks a little bit about what that, because that was such an important time. So we're talking the picket lines for boycotting grapes, right?
Yeah, it was the birth of the beginning of the United Farm Worker Movement, and Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, who hopefully we all know. And they literally started a nationwide strike to have people not eat grapes. And I went to picket lines many, many, many weekends all through my high school career. Well, my years of high school. That was one of my major civic and community involvements. I spent a summer working with a United Farm Worker caravan when they came to Chicago, and they really spread out. And this was the birth of that movement. But at the same time that was going on, my parents really were leaders in their own right. As I said, my mother took me to my first picket line, but it was also when Head Start was starting. And we realized that the local school was not going to have a bilingual or Spanish-speaking Head Start teacher. And my father organized parents in the community to go talk to the school and the school superintendent. And they said, of course, we don't have money. And so then they fundraised for it. And so ironically, the organization that I lead now, the Latino Policy Forum, one of our core issues is early childhood education. And we're still trying to get children enrolled in Head Start and in early education. But I really saw that activism and them using their voice and their speaking up and speaking out and being the catalyst to get others to work with them. And so I really had that as an early example. And then, as I mentioned, I did a lot of picketing in front of grocery stores, asking people not to buy grapes.
Well, talk a little bit about why that was so important, because um, first of all, the farm workers picked all the fruit and the vegetables, and they were picking wine for the wineries, right?
Well, just like
And
a
grapes for the wineries.
social labor movements that still exist today, low-wage workers are often exploited. People worked and still work backbreaking hours out in the fields with no water, no bathroom breaks, and very, very low wages. So it was a whole movement that eventually led to a strike so that people who pick our fruits and our vegetables could get better wages and could have some of the dignity restored to them as they worked. Regrettably, it still exists and it's still not, it's been somewhat improved, but not totally resolved. I think about it now today with climate change. And if it's dangerous for us to go outside with this heat, imagine what it's like for the people that are still bending over all day picking lettuce and or oranges for 8 hours a day, and just how challenging it is for them. So this was in the 1970s. So literally 50 years ago, it was, we've seen lots of social movements since that time, but it probably was one of the largest and most organized, certainly for that time, in a way that we knew that we could really unite as a community across the nation to really improve the rights of those that work so hard for us so that we could eat our fruits and vegetables.
And for those that are young, because so many of our Latinas are young, they probably know the Si Se Puede call, and that came out of that movement that was started by Dolores Huerta. And this is kind of the foundation of Latino civil rights, actually. So you're tilling the soil for what is going to come in the future. And we weren't very well known then as Latinos. This is the first big movement where people are seeing who Latinos are and what some of our challenges are.
No, that's exactly right. It was one of our first big social movements that really swept the nation, and where we saw where if we organized, we could see improvement for our communities. So my parents were very involved with that, and as I mentioned, I did that. I was an activist and went to marches and supported the United Farm Workers all through high school. And when I think about my early activism, when I have a picture with me where I'm only about 14 years old, and I am one of the marshals for one of the big marches in Chicago. I was asked to be a marshal, which means I was asked to try to keep order, to, tell people where to go. And I'm like, how did I get asked to do this?
I know. Isn't this amazing? So even at 14 years old, Sylvia, they saw you as somebody that could really help and get
Yeah.
people to do what they needed to do.
And
And for some of you that are young, think about this, because if you look back on your early life, it's going to sort of show you what your journey is going to be, because this certainly was like almost an imprint.
yeah, it really was. And the other thing I'll say about just my origin story is my mother and my father were both social activists, but my father was a gifted orator. He could talk to anybody about anything for a long time. And from him, I think I really learned to use my voice and to speak up and speak out and not be afraid to use my voice. I mean, oftentimes I think we wait for permission. And I think I'm one of those folks who's never really waited for permission. I've always prided myself on being a truth teller and saying what needs to be said. But
And that requires a certain amount of courage and a certain amount of self-efficacy, that you have to know yourself. And
Well,
so those are kind of building blocks to being able to stand up because you got to know what you're going to say and you
yeah.
have to have the power and the courage to do it.
And having the confidence to do it. I mean, that's one of the gifts I think that my father really did instill in me was the confidence to do it, right? That I knew what I was speaking was truth. I knew I was always, even from that very young age, talking about societal inequality and what we need to do to have equity, not just for farm workers, but for Latinos in general. And one of the things I remember telling myself around that time is, I don't know what I'm going to do when I grow up, but I know I am not going to be the quiet Latina sitting in the corner, afraid to speak up. I know that I'm going to use my voice. I had no idea how that would unfold over the decades, and I can share more about where I am now. But I had that thought. But the other thought that came to me when I was very young, during that time of social movements and going to lots of marches and picketing and supporting the United Farm Workers was, and I have no idea where, I do think that sometimes we just get messages, divine messages, right? And that's the only way that I can explain it. Because I also had the thought, well, marches are good and we need to have protest politics. And people are very good at doing that. But we need more than marches. We need to know the data. We need to know the information. We need to know how many farm workers are impacted. We need to know what their quality of life is. We need to know how many of them really don't have health benefits, how many really don't get access to water. That was part of my analysis, but it was more than just my analysis because it was a thought that came to me, I think that truly wasn't from me. But I also didn't know what that looked like. So all through college, all through high school, I was an activist. All through college, I was an activist and very involved with things.
So I think a lesson is here, Sylvia, is that you don't always have to know the answer right away, but the question's important because it gets you to start thinking about things, looking at things, wondering, well, what does this really mean? And I think the fact that it happened to you at such a young age really planted the seeds for you to become analysis, a public policy person, someone who really looks at how do you create real structural change.
Well, that's where I was getting to, Juana, and you're very right. I don't know that you always need to know the answer, but you have to ask the question and you have to set the intention. So when I was very young, I asked the question about what else is there besides marches? And I set the intention of, I know whatever I do, I'm going to use my voice. And I had no idea how that would unfold, literally all these many decades later. But it wasn't until had my third job out of college and I had moved from Chicago to Springfield, the state capital of Illinois. And let me tell your audience, there ain't a whole lot happening in Springfield. Not a lot there other than the
Especially
state.
for a young woman just out of college.
And I took a third of a cut in salary,
Ooh, yeah.
at a very young age, and also not highly recommended, but I've taken 3 salary cuts in my life.
I've done the same thing. I think if it's your passion, if it's your purpose, they say do what you love and the money follows. Well, I consider myself rich because,
Exactly. And
you
just
know,
always
because we're both comfortable. We're not,
right.
and
I always have,
we've
but,
got
but
to do what we need to do.
But I've definitely made decisions that weren't always the most financially sound for my career. But when I was in Springfield, I had a fellowship in the governor's office, our state capital, so I learned a lot about government. But that was for a year, and then I took a job in the governor's budget office. And I walked into the governor's budget office, and everybody there was relatively young, just a few years out of college. And everybody had this degree in public policy but me.
Oh, wow.
And I said, what is public policy? I'm the first in my family to go to college and my extended family to go to college. This is 40 years ago, at least. I'm like, I had no idea what an academic discipline of public policy existed. And so then when I learned, I'm like, oh, public policy are the analytical tools to address what we need to have a better society, to address inequality in society. And public policy can be on transportation issues or education issues or civil rights issues. That was a whole awakening for me to understand what a public policy degree was. And literally I had an aha, well, this is the degree that I've been seeking that I didn't even know existed.
Answering the question of demonstration is great, but what else do we need to do in
How do
order
we
to
get
move the needle and to
demonstrate?
create change?
Exactly. How do we get beyond the marches and the demonstrations? And so I spent 2 really hard years, an additional 2 really hard years in our state capital. And budget training, let me tell you, was the best training I ever got because I had to know the state budget for my departments. I had to know all the programs. I had to review every single piece of legislation that impacted with virtually no training. You're sort of thrown into it and you sink or swim. But I was really fortunate in that I had supportive colleagues, and I did well. And so then rather than going to get my next job in government, I attempted, well, I went to policy school, and
That sounds so great. I went to policy school.
then I went to policy school.
I want all you young people that are listening to take heed because all of our life journeys of the women you've talked about are step by step by step that lead you to being able to have this incredible impact, not just in your state, but nationally.
And let me say
And sometimes we don't even know why we're doing it.
well, true. And let me also say that in my experience, it has not been a linear journey, right?
Yeah.
So I started policy school. I actually was fortunate to go to the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, but I didn't finish because I became an unwed mother. And then I had to say, well, what do I do with life? And do I go back to school pregnant for my second year? My partner at the time, does he come with me? Does he not? And so motherhood intervened, and I had and this is a long time ago, my daughter is now 37. And so then I went back, I was bound and determined. I went back to policy school when she was 18 months old at the University of Chicago, because I was living in Chicago, and they wouldn't take my credits from Harvard. So I had to start all over again. But I was determined that that was a graduate degree that I was going to pursue, and that was the skill set that I needed. And the hard work, the sacrifice, it definitely was not easy going to school with
Well,
an
it's sort of like life throwing you a hard ball.
yeah. Well, and we all have our hard balls. We all
Exactly.
and, on the big scheme of things, mine wasn't that big compared to a lot of other folks I know, but it was definitely a challenge. And so yeah, so I had to start all over again at the University of Chicago, and went through all of that. And, while I was in grad school, again, how we multitask. I was a new mom, I was married, I was at the University of Chicago in graduate school, I was president of the board of a local community organization, and I was working.
Thank
So
God you were young, although we're
yeah,
still
really,
doing
you
all of
never
that.
right? Because it was a lot, right? It
Yeah.
definitely a lot. And then when I finally finished graduate school, 10 years after undergrad. So again, if you're thinking about going back to graduate school, it's never too late.
Well, no, I think that's a great message for young people today. And the other thing is when you do look back and you're older, you know that 2 or 3 or 4 years in preparing yourself is not that big a deal. You think it is when you're doing it, but when you look back, you go, wow, that was a great investment. So you invested. And I just do want you to just stop for a minute. And especially for young people who are going, what? Go back to graduate school for public policy change? Tell them right now, very succinctly, why this is so important.
Because public policy are the analytical tools we need to create societal change on any of the pressing issues of the day, from our environment to transportation to education to promoting equity for Black and Latino communities. It is the analytical tools, a way of thinking, a way of conducting analysis, and determining what, and for me, the way that I have used it, because you can do many, many things with a policy degree, of what is the measure of equality or inequality for the Latino community compared to the rest of society or to the non-Latino population.
Yeah. So let's drill down now that you're at the Latino Policy Forum, which we'll explain in just a minute. But give an example of this, because I know for our young people, they're going like, okay, public policy, what kind of impact can you have with it? So take an example from your work today, and then we'll talk a little bit about the forum and how that mushroomed into what it is today.
Oh, there's a lot of examples, but these days I'm really privileged to work with an amazing team that's doing amazing work for an organization that I've stewarded and been executive director and then president and CEO of for the past almost 16 years. Um, so let me just give you one of the most recent examples. Our state of Illinois is creating a new Department of Early Education so that children can get access to an early education for their academic trajectory. And they're taking parts from 3 different state agencies to create a brand new department. So my team, one of my staff was on the advisory committee. Another one of my staff, this was legislation that it had to get introduced into our General Assembly and then eventually had to get passed. Another one of my team members was meeting with the governor's office on a weekly basis to talk about what legislators were saying or not saying, were they buying into this? And then while we were looking at all aspects of what this new department would do and the legislation to create it, our really unique contribution, because we're very concerned about Latino children and immigrant children and bilingual children, was we researched and worked with attorneys to get language in this legislation to make Illinois the first state in the nation to ensure protections and to ensure that all children birth to age 5 are eligible for an early education, regardless of their immigration status.
Ooh, great.
Some folks may be familiar with Plyler versus Doe, which is the lawsuit that enabled all children in K to 12 to get a free public education, right?
Mhm.
All of our children go to school, even those
Right.
regardless of their immigration status. So we got those protections now for children birth to 5. For
Yeah.
the state.
This is heavy stuff and heady stuff for especially young Latinos who probably haven't thought about this. But I do want to challenge all of our listeners to think about this, because if we really care about climate change, or if we really care about education or care about health, the way things get moved is through public policy, legislation, lobbying. And I know a lot of times young people are like, oh, what about that system that keeps us down? No, we have to learn how to work that system for our benefit.
Right.
And I think that's the beauty of the Latino Policy Forum, that it really has established this whole baseline for Latinos, that we're part of that conversation. We're at the table. We're bringing resources. We're bringing data. So that's what's so exciting about the work you're doing.
Yeah, and that's just one example, but that's exactly right, that we've been around long enough, we're respected enough that we have an amazing team who sits at all these policy decision-making tables, that we have alumni now who are in key positions of leadership and power in the state. I have one former staff member who's deputy governor for the state of Illinois for education. Had another one of our founders and board members who is deputy governor for the state of Illinois for health and human services. Have a former staff person who's now chief of staff to the mayor of the city of Chicago, and countless others who are running organizations and doing amazing things. So one of the challenges is always, how do you get listened to? How do you get taken seriously? Obviously we have to do the analysis and develop the proposal, but if it's not being received, we're not going to get anything done. So that we have enough friends and allies that we can get a listening ear, and that our proposals are sound enough that they say yes. And then it's a collaborative process to try to implement big picture policy
Yeah,
change.
and from my work with millennials a lot and younger people, a lot of times they don't understand that. And I didn't either when I was young. We didn't know what it would take to create this kind of change. But I also wanted to put in, this is intergenerational leadership. Like you and I are here and you're talking about other people that we've worked with who are now moving up, and I keep saying this is our time for Latinos. We have these people in place. So one of the important things I want to stress right here is the mentorship that you and I and other people can provide young people who want to get involved, that they need to reach out and find out about these resources in their community so they can learn the big picture and learn how to be real change agents.
Yeah, so I'm really proud, Juana, and you came to Chicago many years ago, and we developed the Latino leadership program for Latino leaders here in Chicago.
It's a beautiful program.
And now we've transitioned that to be a leadership program that brings together Black and Brown community leaders in Chicago. And we have literally incubated hundreds of leaders who are now in various roles all over the city. A lot still really working in our neighborhoods to promote positive community change. And over the past years, we have really strengthened the public policy component of that leadership training so that they really, not everybody's going to be able to do what we do. And we're fortunate that we've been able to grow and build our infrastructure, and we get paid to do this job. It's much harder to do if it's not part of your everyday work.
Right, right.
But we have been able to train people on, okay, as a community member, as an executive director of a organization that provides services, as a concerned resident, here is
Or
what
parent, your parents got involved in the schools, and
right.
many of our parents start that way.
So here are different things that you can do, right? You can be part of coalitions. Everybody can go and talk to their local elected officials. Everybody has a city council person, everybody has a state rep. Get to know them, meet with them, tell them what your concerns are. If your concerns aren't yours alone, bring your neighbors to have that conversation with them, right? Just today, I was sharing with my staff, my newer staff, some of our how of what we do things, and we saw the little Schoolhouse Rock video of how a bill becomes a law, and it's I'm not going to say it's that simple, but every bill, every piece of legislation starts with an idea. And everybody has the capacity to go meet with and talk to their local elected officials about what they think needs to be done. Whether it's getting a stop sign at the corner so that there are fewer accidents, whether it's about getting more resources for your local school so that your school can have an after-school program, right? Whatever it is that concerns you, right? And then as time moves on, we train parents and community people to come to our state capitol to testify, to
Yeah,
meet with legislators. That may not happen right away, but you can go have a conversation with that local person in your office. You can write a letter to the editor for your local newspaper. You can band with other people, so it's not just you alone, but your neighbors who all express concern on an issue. And you can go to your state capitol, and we take parents to our state capitol to meet with legislators and to testify on legislation.
yeah. And one other thing you mentioned was the leadership program that you're doing there. And I've been doing leadership for so many years, and it's so important. So folks that are listening, if you know of a leadership program in your community, that's a great way to get not only the training you need, but to get hooked up into a network of like-minded people. And so I hope this series and the work that all of our interviewees and all of our leaders are talking about is really encouraging folks to take that next level. One of the things I've noticed about millennials is that they have huge abilities to network online and to work online and to do some of this in a whole new way than we do it. And so let's just encourage them. But I want to switch channels a little bit, Sylvia, to talk more about you, because this certainly was a lot of challenges that were in your way. I know your parents were your early mentors, and I'm so grateful for them and for what they did. But what are some obstacles in the way that you think young women and people that are listening might be able to learn from you on challenges you overcome?
Well, I think our biggest challenge is ourself and our own self-talk and our own self-doubt and our own sense of imposter syndrome. And I think what I always say, it's not that I'm so smart, it's just that I think I am. And I say that in jest.
All the way, everybody who's listening, I know I'm smart. I am powerful. I have courage, and I'm going to create the best change in the world.
But exactly, we have to give ourselves that talk. I know I am a catalyst for change.
Yes.
I know that I speak truth. I know that if it is coming through me and something that I feel that needs to be said, others are thinking the same thing. I know that I've been fortunate and that I've been able to sit at policy tables, and often being the only Latina or the only woman, with policymakers. But I know, and every one of your audience members, no one has their life experience. No one has their perspective. I know my life experience. I know my perspective is valid and legitimate. and something that I can contribute. People, too many of us have that self-doubt that we don't think that what we have to say is worth saying. I say no to that. Everything that I think and that I say and that I want to contribute. So many of us have so much to contribute. It's how do we find the confidence to be able to do that in various settings. And yes, I many years ago, Juana, I mean, I've done a lot of work on myself over the years, but one of the things that I did was I did a course once that someone was piloting, and I was like, what is my personal mission statement? And having that ground me in terms of my personal mission statement. My last name is Puente. Puente means bridge. I came up with, I am a bridge between and within the Latino community and larger society. I am building bridges of understanding. But I also, in that, really focused on my values. What is important to me? Because especially when we're being challenged and going through hard times,
You have to stand on your values.
you have to be really grounded in your values. And thirdly, we have to be grounded in who we are, racially, ethnically, culturally, as women, as Latinas, as the daughter of Santa Vasquez and Ben Puente, as the granddaughter of, right? To really be grounded and centered in where we come from and knowing that our
Oh,
culture.
by the way, Sylvia, we have to do that work because no one's going to do it for us. And it certainly isn't available in our schools or universities. It's really that personal journey of integrating who you are, your background, your history, your challenges, your interests, and your passion. And so I applaud you for doing so much of that work and encouraging others to do as well.
And I talk about, generally 3 life lessons, right? But one of them is to be grounded in who we are, everything that we're just talking about, and to really see that as an asset in who we are, right? To be grounded in our values, right, is so critically important. To know, but we also, though, have to really take time, and I'm not always the best at this, even though I challenge, but we need to take time for reflection. We need to take time to contemplate. We need to take time to get grounded in who we are, whether that's through prayer or meditation, walking,
Journaling.
walking in the mountains, hiking in the mountains, journaling, right? You've got to take that time and have that practice that really puts you in touch with yourself. And I also believe we all think different things about whatever we think about spirituality and religion. But I do what I do not for me. I do what I do for my community. And I do what I do because I know that there is something bigger than me, whatever that is, whatever it looks like, whatever we want to call it, right? So how do we maintain that connection? And then the other thing that I'll say too, Juana, that I don't often talk about, but definitely has been part of my spiritual journey. It's the faith, and I don't consider myself to be Catholic anymore. But I do believe that my life is in divine order, and I believe that everything happens for a reason.
Yeah, well,
And
remember the old saying, estamos en los manos de Dios, in the
some,
hands of God.
right?
And our tradition is so grounded, not necessarily in the Catholic faith, but grounded in the belief of God's providence and God's goodness. I mean, that's why we keep going, because we believe and we can see it, our own families, like
Right.
we're the dreams of our ancestors. They believed one day this would come where you would have this kind of a job and have your kind of influence. And the women that are listening who have good jobs and homes and so forth, this is what we fought for generations.
And it doesn't mean that you don't do everything you need to do to be prepared, to prepare yourself through academic training, to prepare yourself and to, if I'm going to go make a presentation, it doesn't mean that I'm not prepared, but I do what I can. I do everything that I can. And then I do say, okay, my life is in divine order. It's going to unfold the way it unfolds. Right. And I stop worrying about it. And that I believe for me is a real gift in how I've survived doing this work for as long as I have, because I'm not going to say that I never worry, but I know that it's all going to be okay, even if it's not the outcome that I want.
Well, and I also think that for those that are listening, age gives you a little bit of that perspective as well, because you can look back at all the things you were so upset about and realize that they worked out, and also that, life challenges are also opportunities. We know that. And that as we overcome challenges, whether it's a lack of education or a health challenge, or challenge to have balance in our life, which I think is something we continuously work at, that
Right.
all of these things make us bigger, better, and more developed people. We have more to offer, more to give. And so these life lessons really prepare us for our next step.
And the other thing that I would say, I'll totally de acuerdo, Juana, an agreement with everything that you're saying. But the other thing that I really want to say to especially the younger people listening is that we all have a responsibility for leadership. And
Yes.
leadership may mean you've written the books the way you've done. Leadership may mean, I get to lead this amazing public policy organization that's had such impact. But leadership also means that you take your little hermanita and you help her write her college essay, or you help her figure out how to fill out that FAFSA form, or you speak to her about your life experience so that she can learn for it. Because when I say leadership, for me, that means I'm extending the hand so that someone else can come along with me. And we all have, and when I say leadership, we all have a sphere of influence, whether it's on the big stage, whether it's among our family, among our friends. We all have people that look to us and that we can influence on an ongoing and a regular basis. And that's when I say it's not being the leader, but it is stepping up to leadership.
Yeah, and I think, we've talked a little bit, you and I, in the past, about leadership by the many, and how Latinos are reaching a critical mass today. And if we can get people engaged and involved, we really can become the powerful influence that we're really destined to be in America, because I believe we're going to transform our society and really bring some of our wonderful values into the mainstream. So, Sylvia, when you look at the Latino community, what is it that, I mean, here you've dedicated your life, I've dedicated my life to uplifting Latinos. What is it that makes Latinos so special? What is it about our culture
I
that you
wouldn't say
really
we're any,
love?
I wouldn't say we're any more special than anyone else, because I believe everybody is special, right? But I think we have a unique set of assets that we can draw on, right? Our cultural history, the fact that we are we have many of us very close ties to our country of origin, the fact that we have strong family bonds, the fact that you say this, you taught me this one, Juana, that we're a we culture and not an I culture, right? That we, the collective we, is just so powerful in terms of how we move forward and how we see ourselves.
Many of our issues in the society today is the I factor, the fact that three men own half the wealth in the United States. That's the I as opposed to the we. And Latinos are just we, it's just that sense of the we, how do we help so that we don't have these kind of issues? Because we don't want to feel special. We want to feel like everybody is lifted up because of our collectivity and mutuality, which are our values.
Well, and along those lines, when we say what makes us special, there is no one else like you. There is no one else like me. There is no one else with a unique set of gifts and values and perspective and life experience of everyone that's going to listen to this podcast, right? It's understanding that we're each unique and we each have something to give. Now, whether what we're giving is on the big stage, or if it's just, taking care of our parents as they age, if it's raising our sons to be good men, if it's teaching our daughters confidence so that they can speak out and they can live their full life potential, right? Everybody has that capacity to give and influence and really celebrate the gifts of who they are. And I think that's it, is acknowledging that we all have gifts, right? And let me see if I can remember it, Juana. I know you know this quote, it's by Marianne Williamson, right? It's what frightens us so much is being the most powerful, brilliant, amazing person we can be, right?
Yes.
What
Yes.
frightens us is stepping into our power, stepping into our life, right? Not the fact that we don't have it, but how do we fully step into it?
Yeah.
That's
So let's take a deep breath, ladies, and let's step into our power. Let's right now make that commitment that we are, and that's the name of this, el poder de la mujer. And
Mhm.
as women, we have such amazing power as well, even though, we were socialized and for history didn't accept women's power. But look at what's happening with women today. So women are really on the move now, and especially Latinas, because we have both our culture and our gender.
Well, and we see it, when we look at it, we are the growing demographic of the nation, right? I mean, there are more of us than ever before, right? To your words, we are becoming a multicultural nation led by the Latino community. And there's so much that we can give and that we can contribute. We have to own it. And when we do that, because we've also been taught humility, right? It doesn't make us any better than anyone else because I want everyone to be in their power. I want everyone to be in their light. How much more amazing progress we'll be able to make when that happens.
Yeah, you've said that a couple times, Sylvia, and I think it's a real important message for people to take out of this, especially today when we have backlashes and, we have the white supremacy movement. This is not about anybody taking over. This is not about anyone being better than anyone else. This is about opening up the table. This is about welcoming people. This is the bienvenido spirit.
Mhm.
To see ourselves as all of us as one big universal family that's here to uplift humanity because we got a lot of stuff to do. And so everybody using their gifts and moving forward and realizing that we're really in a transformational period where if all of us step up and keep moving, we can really create the multicultural good society. My new definition of leadership is that the purpose of leadership is to create a society that takes care of its people.
Mm.
Isn't that great? That's all we need to do is take care of each other. Make sure our children have early childhood, make sure everyone who wants to go to college can, make sure, like my family who had this little house that they bought with the GI Bill back when I was 7 or 8 years old, that everybody can have their little casita.
To eat. We have a planet for our
Yeah.
children.
Well, I tell people I never saw a homeless person until I was in my 30s. I mean, we
Yeah,
do not have to live in a society that does not take care of its people,
right, agreed.
because people are our greatest asset. Well, as we kind of come to an end, Sylvia, what are some nuggets or pieces of wisdom you might want to plant in some of our women's lives today, that they could take with them, kind of gifts?
Well, hopefully everyone has heard this, right? And, as we tend to be givers, but we also have to recognize that we have to take care of ourselves so that we're not so depleted that we can't continue to give. So that it's okay to take time for ourselves. It's okay to indulge ourselves in that spa day once in a while. It's okay to go get our nails done. It's okay to go hiking in the mountains. Whatever it is, it's going to nurture our spirit, right? And that we really need to be intentional about taking time for that, even with all of our family and community obligations, right? So I think that that's really, really, really important. And then what I would also say, and we don't trust our intuition in our inner voice enough. That really, I believe that the divine speaks through us, right? And so when you're really discerning and you're getting a message of to go one way versus another way, or you have a difficult issue to resolve, to really trust your inner voice, because I think that voice really does speak volumes, and can really, really guide us. Because a lot of what I've done in my life, when I don't know where it comes from. I don't know where the words come from. I don't know how I'm going to say what I'm going to say, but I just trust that if it's coming through me, then it's something that I need to say.
And you
But
said something real important about that, and that is ask the questions.
yeah,
What should I say? How can I prepare myself? What's going to heal this person? What's going to make this person feel okay?
yeah,
What's my next step?
yeah.
And then have the belief, the faith that you will get the answer. And
I mean,
I want to say that Robert Greenleaf in The Servant as Leader, which is one of the philosophies that I follow, said that the most reliable part of the servant leader was the intuition, what
yeah,
you're talking about, because it's the inner voice. But you, first of all, you have to ask, and you have to be quiet and listen, because there's so much noise going on, you don't hear it. So in order to really get inner guidance, you have to ask questions, and you have to have a little time, like you said, reflect, journal, walk, anything, and then listen, because it might come from another person, a book, your inner voice, it might come through this interview, ladies.
Last thing I'll say, and maybe last thing I'll say, Juana, is I think it's really, well, sort of two parts to it, right? That certainly as activists and in the world today, I always tell my staff, we're an advocacy organization, and the DNC was just in Chicago recently, and it was just so wonderful and beautiful to see all that energy. But so many politicians and speakers use the word fight.
Yes, I saw that.
I do not use the word fight. I tell my staff and my team, even though we're a public policy and an advocacy organization, we don't fight, because I believe when you put out the energy of fight, you get fight back.
Right.
And that's why I think we have the chaos that we have at the national level, and the discord, and people not listening to each other, and such oppositional views, because people are putting out, they're going fighting.
That's also male energy, by the way, Sylvia.
And they're getting it
And
back.
one of the reasons I work so hard on getting women to get into leadership, because I'm hoping that we're going to bring a different kind of energy, an energy of compassion, of people, of relationships, of, wanting good for others. And I totally agree with you about the fight thing.
All of that is where we need to get to. And my journey and my struggle still is, how do I lead with love? Right?
Lead with love. Ladies, listen to this. How do I lead with love?
But I want to say, even though I don't say that I lead with a fight, and I don't use that word, I am a warrior, because I stand for something. I stand in my truth, my principles, my values. I stand in what's good and just for our community. I stand for creating opportunity. I stand for having justice and equity, and teaching and treating all people with humanity, right? I am a warrior, but I am a peaceful, loving warrior, is what I aim to be.
Beautiful, because the warrior traditionally was the protector of the people.
Thank you. Yeah, so we are the protectors, and we don't have to, which doesn't mean you don't defend yourself, right? But, one of the things I'm challenged with these days is this cancel culture, that if someone says something that you find inappropriate for whatever reasons, they're just dismissed, right? That to me, you've got to give people grace. You've got to give people a second chance, right? I believe we all deserve that. But that cancel culture is just so judgmental and so dogmatic, right? And I don't see anything graceful or loving. I don't see much grace or love in it. And so for me, and I'm not saying I've got it, because it's still a challenge for me, right? But how do I really lead with peace? And how do I lead with love?
Beautiful, beautiful. So what I want to say to the women that are listening today is that I hope you've gotten some incredible steps by steps about what you need to do to enhance your own power, and to bring your gifts to our community and to our culture, which so much needs all of us to really uplift, especially as we're growing, as we're coming into our power, and as we're beginning to make all these changes. So Sylvia, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all you do for our people.
Thank you.
For your wisdom, and
so
for
much.
taking time to help our women, particularly the young ones, keep moving forward, paso a paso, step by step. Te quiero.
Te quiero, and I'm ending these days, I'm ending with peace and radical blessings.